Good evening and welcome to the Writer's Block. I'm your host, John Ronan, and as you know now, because we are in our 35th season, I talk to writers about their craft, what they're working on, what they've accomplished in the past, what they're planning for the future. We also have, as you know, other brands of artists on now and then. We have had musicians, we've had on sculptors, we've had on painters. So if you have an idea for a writer who might be a great guest, or other brand of artist who might be a great guest for the Writer's Block, watch for our address at the end of the show. We'd be very happy to get your suggestions. I also want to remind you that the Writer's Block and all the other wonderful programming that is produced by 1623 Studios is a result of cable access television. It's a wonderful community property, a wonderful community asset, and you don't get it with Dish or other means of accessing the internet. So stick with the Writer's Block, stick with cable. I'm very happy today to say that we do have a writer. She is a memoirist by the name of Kristin Czarnecki, and she's going to talk about her book, Encounters with Inscriptions. Now, if her name is familiar, I want to point out that she was on the show before as the assistant director of the Rockport Art Association and Museum. She is now the director of that institution, but she is here as an English writer, an English scholar, and memoirist. Kristin, welcome to the Writer's Block.
Thanks, John.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
As I said before the show, I was going to ask you some softball background questions. Where are you from, and where did you go to school?
Sure. So I'm originally from South Bend, Indiana. I grew up there. I went to Notre Dame for college. My dad was a professor. We lived 4 blocks from campus, so ours was a Notre Dame neighborhood. So I went to Notre Dame for college. I went to Northwestern for my master's, and I got my PhD from the University of Cincinnati. All in English. So
you stayed in the Midwest.
I did, yeah, for quite a while.
Pete Buttigieg, or how do you?
Buttigieg.
Buttigieg.
Yes.
Buttigieg. Was he mayor while you were there?
Not while I was there, but yeah.
Later.
Yes, a little later, yeah.
How did you find Gloucester?
Well, my mother was from Boston, and when we were growing up, we spent part of the summer in Rockport. My uncle had a cottage in Rockport. So from the time I can remember, as far back as I can remember, I've been coming to Rockport, family vacations, and then as an adult, my husband and I started coming to Rockport and Gloucester for vacation, loved it, and we decided to move here permanently. So we've been here about 2.5 years now.
And you still love it?
Still love it.
Well, yes. I think you are a wonderful asset for the Cape artist community to get a hold of.
Thank you.
I read your book, Encounters with Inscriptions, and we were going to plug the daylights out of it, and sales will skyrocket.
Let's hope.
Describe this book, Kristin.
Sure. So this is a book about books. I write about the books inscribed and given to me by my parents over the years. They both passed away within 9 months of each other about 5 years ago. And other things happened during that time that were pretty brutal. So it was a painful, sorrowful stretch of time. And as I have my whole life, I turned to my books for solace and distraction. I've been collecting books my whole life. I was an English professor for 20 years, so books, the physical books are important to me. And of course the words inside. So one night I was home and I started looking through my books, and I opened them up and I saw inscriptions from my parents, some that I hadn't looked at in years, some that were new to me. So I went around the house and I gathered up all the books I had from my parents with inscriptions in them. And I went to my computer and I typed them out, and I thought, some of these books I've read several times, some I've never read. They were gifts to me from ever since I was a kid through an adult. And I thought, I'm going to reread these books or read them for the first time and see what I get out of them. And then I kind of felt compelled to write about the books and any rabbit holes that opened up, thinking about who I was when the books were gifted to me, what maybe did my parents hope that I would find in these books. And one thing led to another, and one essay led to a second and a third, and then I had a group of them and decided to try to publish them all together as a book.
from the idea you've got of putting together a memoir, and through all the reading and rereading, I think you mentioned it took you 3 years to read everything. What kind of timeline are we talking about, from the inception to when you had a book in your hand?
It was almost exactly 3 years. I was working as an English professor at the time, so my main opportunities to write were over the Christmas break, the summer break, the spring break, things like that. So I would grab any writing time that I could. Probably took me roughly 3, 4, 5 weeks per chapter. Each chapter is devoted to a certain book. And then, of course, once that's all through, you need to start writing the pitch, the short blurb, the long blurb, find out how to present it to potential publishers and editors and things like that. So that part of the process takes several months as well, or it took me several months. So by the time I got a lovely contract from Legacy Book Press, 3 years had passed since I began the project.
I got to say that's good timing. The research is impressive, and I originally thought, until I saw that 3-year line, that it would have taken longer. But your background is English literature. You have a PhD from Cincinnati, so much of this material and the process of researching is familiar.
Exactly. Yes, that's what I do. I read books. I write about books. I research books. So it's very comfortable terrain for me. So this was a little bit different, of course, from straight up academic writing. There's personal narrative in here, and personal experience and family experience, blended with the literary exploration. But it is the writing that I know best and that I'm very comfortable with and that I enjoy.
Before the show, we were talking. You were saying that the book contained a lot of research, and it is a memoir, and it was certainly partly therapy for you getting over your parents' death. But that doesn't get. You don't let the personal get in the way of the discussion of the literature.
Yeah, and maybe vice versa as well. Whereas I was hoping that the research that I did, in terms of maybe an author's background or the context of the story or the poetry and things like that, those things that I bring in, I hope enhance the personal narrative rather than overwhelm it. So I wanted to strike a nice balance between memoir and literary exploration without having any one sort of take over the other.
And you do that. You do that. Yeah. They don't. Neither side pushes the other off screen. I wonder if you would read the list of the books that are included here and discussed, and mention their authors, if you would. Sure,
absolutely. So from among the books I have from my parents, I selected 12 to write about, and they are A Light in the Attic, poems by Shel Silverstein, A Child's Christmas in Wales, which is a children's short story by Dylan Thomas. Reading in the Dark is a novel by Irish writer Seamus Dean. Luca and the Fire of Life is a novel by Salman Rushdie. Mrs. Wolfe and the Servants, An Intimate History of Domestic Life in Bloomsbury is a book by Alison Light.
I want to pause right there. Yeah. You are the former chair of the Virginia Woolf.
President, yes. What? I was president of the International Virginia Woolf Society for 6 years.
International Virginia Woolf Society. Yeah. And you were the president.
Yes.
I want to stick that in.
Sure, yeah. When the Trees Say Nothing is a collection of Thomas Merton's nature writing. Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, of course, Emily Bronte and Charlotte Bronte. The Love of a Good Woman is a book of short stories by Alice Munro. When Everything Changed, The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the Present is by journalist Gail Collins. A Good Man is Hard to Find in Other Stories by Flannery O'Connor. The New Basics Cookbook by Sheila Lukens and Julie Rosso, and The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, translated by Edmund Fitzgerald.
That's quite a list. And these are not all the books that your parents gave, but these are your choice.
That's a handful.
Did you intentionally start out with humor because you wanted to start out light?
Yeah, I thought it was good to start off. I didn't really go in a linear trajectory, but I did start off with A Light in the Attic, the poems by Shel Silverstein, because that was given to me when I was 12 years old. And so I thought that would maybe be a good place to start. Like one of the first books that I remember getting from them.
Do you remember getting that?
I do. It was a Christmas present. Yeah.
What books had you read already or reread several times?
Sure.
And what books were fresh to you?
Okay, so several times, A Light in the Attic, Child's Christmas in Wales, the Bronte novels I've read over and over again. I love them so much. Flannery O'Connor stories I'd read several times. Some of them I had only read once, Reading in the Dark, for instance, the book on Woolf and Bloomsbury. Gail Collins's When Everything Changed. These were things that I had read once, maybe shortly after they were given to me, maybe years later. I had never read the Rushdie novel, Luca and the Fire of Life, even though I got it as a birthday gift, I think, in 2002, something like that. 2002. So for the Rushdie, I think the Rushdie novel was given to me many, many years ago. So it was kind of a mix. Some I had read several times, some I had read just once, some I hadn't read at all. So as this process unfolded, I reached for whatever I was kind of in the mood for. Like, I just read a novel, now I'm going to read nonfiction. Or I just read a book of poetry, now I'm going to read cultural criticism, and kind of shake it up a little bit.
Yes, that's a good idea. I like the contrast between, Shel Silverstein and in the same book we have Flannery O'Connor.
Yeah.
brutal short stories.
Yes,
They're
brutal is the word, yeah.
They're difficult to read more than once, or difficult to read the first time. I wonder if you can take an example from any of these authors and read us, I wonder if you could read a passage from the book, and you mentioned the foreword, the preface.
Sure.
Can you read part of the preface, give our audience a sense of the tone and flow of the book?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll read a little bit of the preface, which provides context for how the whole project got underway and why. Home alone one night, I perused my Bronte shelves, a complete set of the novels from 1902, Folio Society editions of Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, an assortment of biographies, the Brontes of Life and Letters, coffee table books on Haworth Parsonage, a graphic biography of Charlotte, a graphic work about the Bronte sibling juvenilia, as well as other books such as Lucasta Miller's The Bronte Myth, Deborah Litz's The Bronte Cabinet, 3 Lives and 9 Objects, and other books on Bronte lore of which fans all over the world never seem to tire. On this night, I reached for one book in particular, an edition of Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights together that my father had given me for Christmas when I was 14 years old. It's bound in plush red leather with gold writing on the cover and gold-edged pages. Opening it, I read the inscription. To Kristin for her 14th Christmas. Read with delight and pleasure, my dear. Love forever and ever. Dad, 1983. Tears welled up in my eyes, for my father had recently died. Seeing his handwriting again and his lovely inscription was like getting a little hello from him when I least expected it and when I most certainly needed it. I remember reading Jane Eyre in that volume shortly after receiving it, but it would be another 10 years before I'd read Wuthering Heights in a graduate course called Novels of the Bronte Sisters, which sparked my Bronte mania. My mother shared my delight and pleasure in the Brontes, and we enjoyed talking about their lives and writing. So I'll skip ahead just a little bit.
Sure.
Thinking about these books, one on a rainy October night, reflecting on our losses, that is, my husband and my losses. We had lost 3 out of 4 parents within 14 months, along with others as well. It was a brutal stretch of time. So I turned to my books for solace and distraction, and upon seeing my father's inscription, for remembrance as well. Of the countless things I miss about my parents, exchanging and discussing books with them might be what I miss the most. A few months later, I found myself combing through books on another night, pulling this or that from the shelves to refresh my mind on storylines, look at beautiful dust jackets, feel the heft of a book in my hands, and inhale the aroma of creamy new pages or musty old ones. I came across another book with an inscription from my parents, and then another, and another after that. Soon I had a stack in my arms and headed to my laptop to type the inscriptions out. The books were birthday or Christmas presents spanning my entire life. Some I had read several times, others not even once. I decided then that I would read or reread all of these books, not necessarily in the order in which I received them. Instead, I would let the process unfold organically and turn to them as the mood struck for a particular genre or author. I would think about what I gleaned from each book now. I would head down rabbit holes for related research and exploration. I would try to stave off expectations and just enjoy the reading experience. And then I'll jump ahead just a bit to the last paragraph.
The last paragraph.
The last paragraph in the preface. My parents gave me the gifts of life and literature. Delving into the books from them might, I thought, allow me to commune with them once again. I longed for a comfortable language of plot, character, chapter, and stanza. Reading these books would be a nostalgic enterprise, but one that would allow me to contemplate the present and look to the future as well. For as Virginia Woolf says in A Room of One's Own, books continue each other, in spite of our habit of judging them separately. They reflect, respond to, and resonate with each other across time and space. They collapse the boundaries often imposed by academia and the marketplace. In their infinite variety, they make room for readers everywhere, inviting us to consider what it means to be human in a complicated world. And so my journey began.
And then you take us on that journey from that page. I want to say that line, the first line of the last paragraph in your preface, is excellent. My parents gave me the gifts of life and literature, and the life and the literature are well balanced in the book. Mm-hmm. How important was this as therapy for you?
It proved to be very therapeutic. I wrote about that a little bit in the afterword. So reading these books from my parents, this array of books allowed me to not only delve into wonderful literature, which is always a joy for me, but to think of them at various stages in their lives. The Dylan Thomas story, A Child's Christmas in Wales, made me reflect on my parents' childhood Christmases and the traditions they passed down to us. One of my father's favorite authors was Thomas Merton, so reading the collection of Merton's nature writings allowed me to gain insights into what was appealing to my dad about Merton and about his writing. Gail Collins's book on essentially the history of American feminism, mainstream American feminism.
She's the columnist who writes, still very active for the New York Times.
Exactly, yes. So her book on the history of the mainstream American feminist movement made me think about my mother, who was very involved in that. So their passions and their interests, when they were parents, from before they were parents, before they even knew each other, the books kind of allowed me to reflect and explore their lives in addition to my own. And that made me feel closer to them and like I was still learning from them and getting something from them in this daily process.
I think that's important because a lot of people do write memoirs, I think, because it helps. It helps for different things, different problems, different challenges. I was interested in the book. You say your father was a big fan of Thomas Merton, and you taught at Georgetown College.
Yes,
right in that neighborhood.
Not far at all from where he spent years.
Where Gethsemane Abbey.
Exactly.
And they make great fudge.
Yes. Yes, they do.
I got a flyer today in the mail.
Yeah.
They make great fudge. But that's just to support the lives of prayer, not to make fudge. I'd like to talk about a couple of the authors, the Brontes especially, because I am not overly familiar with the Brontes, although their names keep coming up in crossword puzzles constantly.
Yes, that's true.
Constantly. Can you tell us about your Bronte mania?
Sure.
In the beginning that your dad gave you.
Sure. Yeah. So he gave me these two classic novels for Christmas when I was 14, and I read Jane Eyre right away. And I love the Brontes novels. They're endlessly fascinating. They're rich. They're involved. The plot lines are complicated, well developed, fascinating, sometimes very disturbing characters. I think a lot of times the Brontes are romanticized in many ways. Film adaptations of Wuthering Heights, for instance, always treat Heathcliff as this handsome romantic hero, and he was a sociopath, essentially. I mean, you know what I mean? They kind of gloss over some of the really rich, complex things. So they're just novels that you see something new in every time you come to them because you're a different person every time you read them. I think their personal stories are fascinating. This isolated home on the moors in Yorkshire. They knew the flora and fauna of their environment inside and out. The moors, the plants, the foliage, the animals, the weather. They lived it every day. They were great walkers. They would walk for hours and hours and hours.
And you visited their town.
I visited,
Haworth.
I visited Haworth Parsonage a couple times, which is really fun and interesting. And then there's the whole history of the five out of the six Bronte siblings died very young, and I think that is in large part why so many people all around the world are fascinated with their story. So in a way, it's a little ghoulish, right? I think that people gravitate towards the Brontes because they want this. They want to know about, well, so-and-so died when she was 11 and only 12, and they were dropping like flies, and what was going on. And that's all fascinating, and I'm very interested in it as well. But I think some of that tends to overshadow how gifted they were, how intelligent they were. They weren't just isolated in a little house in the middle of the moors. Charlotte went to London several times. She lived in Brussels for several years. They read voraciously. They took the newspapers.
She lived in Brussels. I didn't remember
She
that.
did. Mm-hmm. She and her sister Emily went to Brussels to teach in a girls' school. And it didn't work out for Emily. She did not enjoy that. She missed home terribly, so she was only there for a few months. But Charlotte was there for a couple of years.
I think when people explore literature and they find out that the families had seen a great deal of early childhood death, they jump to assume that was part of the necessary tragedy in this author's life. But if you read history, 16th, 17th, 18th century, the lifespan was nothing. It was just people died, kids dying left and right.
Yes, very, very, very brutal. So I explored a little bit of that in the Bronte chapter as well, because it certainly is fascinating. The average lifespan during the time of the Brontes was 28 years old, which is extraordinarily low even for that time. And so I won't go into all the weeds. You can read about it if you like, but one of the things that they discovered was that the cemetery there that backed up against their home, it was tradition to lay the big, heavy concrete cement tombstones flat. And what that was doing, it was killing all the vegetation and not allowing any oxygen to get through. So the bodies that were buried decomposed, and it all sort of sank into the ground and into the groundwater. So there's that. The Brontes and families around Haworth at that time were drinking water contaminated by decomposing bodies. There was no sanitation, that kind of thing. So disease was rampant. It's grim for sure. And once they discovered this, then it became a rule. You had to put the tombstones upright to let the ground do its thing. And Patrick Bronte, their father, who was the pastor there for many, many years, he enacted those rules. He had trees planted all over the place to help with the natural processes of decomposition and rejuvenation and things like that. So it's super interesting.
I think you've talked me into going back and rereading a couple Bronte novels. I think I haven't read any of them since grad school. I want you to pick out another section of. I don't want to force you to pick favorites, but you must like some of these authors besides the Brontes more than other authors. I wonder if you could pick a chapter to read from that is reflects on one of your faves.
Sure. Okay. Let's see. All right. So one of the novels in here that I really, really love as well is called Reading in the Dark by Seamus Dean. He was an Irish writer. He passed away not too long ago.
Seamus Dean.
Seamus Dean.
D-E-A-N.
He was a poet as well, primarily a poet. Reading in the Dark was his only novel, but it's a powerhouse, and it has to do with Ireland and Northern Ireland during the times of the Troubles. It was a gift from my mom for Christmas in 1997, shortly after the novel came out. And so I loved it when I read it the first time. So reading it for this project was the second time I read it. And it made me reflect a lot on that period in history in Ireland, as well as very close friends of the families where the mother was from Ireland. So that as a child, that was my awareness of Ireland, was Mary Mast across the street. And her relatives who would visit, and the Irish accents that would fill the house. And then I later learned that one of Mary's brothers, Dennis, who was a priest in Ireland, was also very prominent in the civil rights in civil rights over there and civil rights activism. And he worked very hard to bring peace between Ireland and Northern Ireland. He published books on some of the atrocities that were going on in the prisons and things like that. So that, again, the literature is wonderful. There's a family connection with this wonderful Irish family across the street, and then a little bit of research into the Troubles.
So I wonder if you could pick out a paragraph or part of a paragraph. We're getting down to time here.
Sure.
That captures the tone of Seamus Dean's writing.
Okay. So it starts on page 21, and the second paragraph tells a little bit about the story. So in Reading in the Dark, the unnamed narrator tells of growing up in Derry, Northern Ireland, his childhood marred by the history and present day of the Troubles. Spanning 1945 to 1961, with a brief final scene set in 1971, the novel contains chapters comprised of vignettes whose titles create a disturbing narrative of their own. Accident, Pistol, Fire, Blood, The Feud, Field of the Disappeared, and so on. Ghosts haunt the narrator's home, or so his mother seems to believe. An old slaughterhouse and the ruins of a whiskey distillery blown up by the British provide the backdrop for his and his friends' neighborhood wanderings. Secrets fester, for men on both sides of the family have a long history with the Irish Republican Army. When the narrator, at around 8 years of age, throws a rock at a police car to distract a bully about to assault him, the repercussions are far more grievous than he had ever anticipated. The narrator leavens such grimness by describing excursions into the countryside, with its sea, air, and the cry of gulls, its caves and rock formations from time immemorial, its folklore, and its folk heroes. So that's just a little,
Very nice.
little bit
Thank
about
you.
the story.
Thank you for reading that.
Yeah.
I had not been familiar with him before I read your book, and he's another person I think you've talked me into reading.
It's a really wonderful novel.
We're
Yeah.
almost out of time.
Okay.
That went very fast.
It did.
This is a delightful memoir.
Thank you.
Kristin. Thank you for sharing it with me and sharing it with our audience.
Thank you so
I
much.
hope that others can learn from you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I want to thank all our audience in television land for being with us as well. If you've learned something about Kristin Czarnecki's memoir, Encounters with Inscriptions, then the Writer's Block has done its job. Thank you again for being with us, and I hope to see you next time on the Writer's Block. Good night.